The Australian Government Summer School for Teachers of Mathematics was conducted at the University of New England in January 2008. 200 mathematics teachers from across Australia gathered to hear high-profile presentations, undertake workshops and undertake seminars on issues that were relevant to contemporary mathematics. Professor Martin Westwell, Director of the Flinders Centre for Science Education in the 21st Century, presented a keynote address entitled Neuroscience and Learning, the Future of the Mind. Martin, I was just wondering if you could tell us what the key themes were of your presentation.
Yeah, I think what we're starting to see is that the research findings from neuroscience and how scientists are starting to think about learning and what's going on in the brain of young people can complement the existing expertise and experience that teachers have.
Right.
So together, coming together in the ways that we understand learning in different ways, by building those two things together and saying, well, where do we overlap, where do we have common understanding, and where is that understanding different? I think we can start to take some big steps forward together as we start to feed in some of the scientific evidence to the experience and the research evidence that we've already got.
So how is your presentation relevant to the teaching of contemporary mathematics?
I think it's absolutely clear we're living in a changing world, and as science and technology has more and more of an impact upon the way that we live and work, then some of the questions around mathematics and maths education around, well, how do we prepare young people for a future, a prosperous future, and that might be socially prosperous or economically prosperous, in a world that is changing and is influenced by science and technology. When we think about the place that young people are in now and the way that they think, that's really affected by the technologies that they use already. And so we talk a lot about Gen Y and maybe future generations, now they're using technology, and there's a gap between the way that they use their technology and the way that perhaps older people are using technology. And that has an influence on the way that we think and learn and behave. And so when we think about maths education, we've got to think about the way that young people are going to be thinking in the future and how the maths education can prepare them for that future. But also the way that the current use of technology and the current environment in which they find themselves has affected their thinking and has affected the way that their brains have wired up. And so their take on maths and its meaning in the world may be different from ours.
Yeah. So are there any key issues or ideas that you would hope that participants might take away from your presentation?
Well, I think one of the kind of umbrella issues is around this bringing together of different ways of understanding learning from neuroscience and from an education background. But I think also when we're thinking about young people and preparing them for the future, it is this notion of change and how a change in an environment, producing a particular environment, a learning environment or an environment at whole, changes the way that their brains are wired up. And how do we influence that change or adapt to that change when we don't have any control over it? I think we will talk a lot about what it means, what's in the learning environment. And I don't really mean the box, the classroom that we put them in, and the number of people at the front of those things, but the learning environment, including the people around them, and that's teachers, of course, other students, parents, societal value of mathematics, some of those bigger things, as well as some of the things around, what can we do to help young people to pay attention in the classroom. Attention, being a really big issue today. What's happening to young people's attention, and what can we do to influence that?
So there's some real challenges for teachers of mathematics today. I mean, things have moved fairly quickly in recent years, the technology and, as you say, the environment in which students are actually learning. From the presentation, are there some practical things which you would hope the teachers might be able to go back and implement in their classroom?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of making the connections between neuroscience and learning and bringing some of the research evidence and making it available and accessible to teachers. But I think, as a scientist, scientists need to draw the line there.
Yes.
Because what do we actually know about learning in the classroom? And so it's about the complementarity of those things. And I think, perhaps 10 years ago, when neuroscientists started to find things out about what was going on in the brain during learning, they essentially got up in front of educators and said, we know all about learning, this is what you need to know. Yeah. And of course it failed dismally, because there's a lot of, appropriately, there's a lot of values and philosophies around teaching, teaching and learning. And the expertise of teachers is partly about the context in which they find themselves, the kids that they've got, responding in the moment, their own particular values, the values of the school and the parent body, and all those things. So whatever I've got to bring in terms of the neuroscience can only match with an individual teacher's values and the context and all those other things.
Sure.
So I think it's about building bridges rather than me suggesting what they might do.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think that one of the interesting findings of the last couple of years has been around how we respond to ambiguity.
Right.
And when we're thinking about the future and how do we prepare these young people for the future and the change that's going on in education and all these things, teachers are increasingly finding themselves in a really uncertain position.
Yes.
How do we do all this stuff? And one of the things that's come out of neuroscience is that when we find ourselves in this ambiguous situation, what we do is we to some extent stop thinking about it rationally and go back to our emotions. Yeah. So we like the things that we're familiar with, and we go there and say, well, this is the area in which we're going to operate. Yeah. And we all have an impulse to do that. And I think one of the things I'll be talking about is how do we just recognise that we have an impulse to do that and think more carefully about how we innovate, about how we take steps forward in an ambiguous situation. Right. That's really tough stuff to do. Yeah. And I'm not talking about just taking all kinds of reckless risks.
No.
But to recognise that we do have this impulse for certainty, but to see where that might be inhibiting some innovation. Yeah. Because what we see often is that impulse for certainty drives a back to basics agenda. Now, back to basics has got some merit, but it also, going back to basics, stops us from going forwards, stops us from innovating and keeping up with young people. Sure. So I think we're going to explore some things around that as well.
You've got some steps there that might help people to plan that and I guess minimise the risk attached to it, so they will feel more comfortable creating a safer environment for themselves to undertake the innovation.
Yeah, absolutely, I hope so.
Yeah, so I think that'll be something everybody will really enjoy. Now, we're going to be putting together the website for the summer school, and there'll be resources going up. Are there other resources that you might want to point the summer school participants to, so they can follow up on the ideas that you've spoken about?
Yeah, I'll make sure that on the website that we put some links into some of the resources. And I think one of the challenges for teachers today is there's a lot of, particularly commercial organisations, pushing brain-based learning in some way. Yes. And that's really of a... some of it's of dubious quality, and there's some really good stuff out there. I think one of the challenges for teachers is to be able to discern between those two. Yeah. But I still think that some of those resources deprofessionalise teachers, and the resources that I'll be putting up, the links that I'll be putting up, will be links where information is available, and so that teachers can integrate that into their own experience, rather than kind of taking a package that's delivered to them, and almost forces them to think in a particular way. I will try and make sure that there are resources there to help support teachers' creativity and innovation.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think that there's this real risk that we undersell the experience and the knowledge that teachers bring. We've got people who are professional in what they do, have learned a lot from what they've undertaken over years in their teaching environment, and to actually use that as a base to come forward rather than just starting from scratch seems to be very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.